The sky above Burma was quiet in a way that felt unnatural to still too empty, broken only by the slow creak of a parachute swaying in the wind. Beneath it hung a young American airman bleeding from his arm, suspended 4,000 feet above a jungle he was never meant to see up close. The smoke from his fallen B-24 Liberator drifted upward like a final reminder of the men he had watched die only moments before. Somewhere in that silence he could still hear the gunfire that had cut their lives short while they dangled helplessly in their chutes. Now it was his turn. A single Japanese fighter, an agile Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar, was circling back, its engine rumbling like a predator returning to finish the kill. The pilot had time, altitude, and firepower. The American had nothing but a shredded flight suit, a fading hope, and a pistol designed for the ground war, not the unforgiving mathematics of World War II air combat. Yet in that fragile space between life and death, something unexpected stirred. A question almost absurd in its simplicity: what can a man do when all he has left is a sidearm and a few heartbeats of falling sky? The answer would rewrite a small corner of the air war over Burma and become a legend whispered among aviators for generations. He had not been born into war. Owen Baggett grew up under the wide Texas sky where summer heat shimmered off quiet streets and the future seemed predictable. He studied hard, marched proudly as a university drum major, and even built a promising life on Wall Street. Nothing in that world hinted that he would one day be fighting for survival in the most brutal corner of the air war over Burma. But the attack on Pearl Harbor shattered the comfortable edges of his life. Like thousands of young Americans, he felt the pull of duty, an abrupt shift from routine to responsibility. Baggett joined the Army Air Forces, earning his wings after months of relentless training. The day he was assigned to a B-24 Liberator crew, he stepped into a machine that represented both power and fragility, a flying fortress that too often returned with empty seats. For the men who flew it, the B-24 Liberator was more than metal and engines. It was noisy, temperamental, and demanding, yet capable of carrying a crew deep into enemy territory. But in the China-Burma-India theater, the aircraft's strengths were overshadowed by the impossible odds it faced. The mountains were unforgiving. The weather shifted from storms to blinding sun in minutes, and the distances were so vast that no American fighters could escort them all the way to Burma. Heavy bombers went alone, tracing a lonely path across hostile skies. Those who had flown a few missions learned quickly that survival often hinged on chance. The air war over Burma was a forgotten front of World War II air combat, overshadowed by Europe and the Pacific Islands. Yet it was here, far from the newspapers and the radio broadcasts, that American crews faced some of the deadliest odds of the entire war. Airfields were primitive. Supplies were scarce. Every mission meant another roll of the dice. Baggett's group, the 7th Bomb Group, understood the cost better than anyone. Aircraft lists posted at the base told the story planes that had taken off at dawn and simply never returned. The men packed footlockers for friends who would not be coming back. They learned not to ask who was next. The silence in the barracks answered for them. Still, when orders came for a strike on the railroad bridge at Pinmana, no one hesitated. The target kept Japanese forces supplied as they pushed north, making it a vital artery in Burma. Disrupting it could buy time for Allied ground forces fighting to hold the line. 12 B-24 Liberators were assigned to the mission, each heavy with bombs and responsibility. Before dawn, engines thundered to life across the airfield, echoing off the hangars in the dark edges of the jungle. Crewmen checked their sidearms out of habit, more as ritual than expectation. A pistol was for the ground war, not for a man strapped into a bomber. No one imagined it would matter once they were airborne. But as the first rays of sunlight washed across the tarmac, Owen Baggett climbed aboard his B-24, unaware that fate had already chosen this mission as the one that would push him from routine into legend. The B-24 Liberator formation crossed into Burma just as the morning haze began to thin, revealing a landscape of rivers, rice fields, and dense jungle that hid entire armies from the sky. For a few quiet minutes, nothing moved except the shadows of 12 bombers drifting across the earth below. Then, like a blade cutting through cloth, the first warning came over the interphone: Japanese fighters approaching fast. The 64th Sentai had been scrambled from Megalodon, and its pilots knew this region better than any map. They flew the agile Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar, a lightweight dogfighter built for speed, turn rate, and aggression. In the broader sweep of World War II air combat, the Oscar was often overshadowed by its flashier cousins, but over Burma, it was feared. American crews knew its silhouette well: long nose, slim wings, and just enough firepower to tear a bomber apart if the pilot got close, and this morning they intended to get close. The first attack came from above and behind classic Japanese doctrine. A cluster of Ki-43 Oscars dove through the formation at nearly 400 miles per hour guns, flashing as they slashed between the bombers before pulling up hard into the sun. Owen Baggett felt the B-24 Liberator shudder as cannon rounds punched through the thin aluminum skin. An explosion ripped through the oxygen tanks, sending white vapor spiraling through the fuselage. Flames erupted instantly. Smoke poured into the cockpit, thick and choking. Sergeant Samuel Crostick fought the fire with extinguishers until the handles went cold in his hands. More hits followed. The number 4 engine began burning. Then the second engine went. Instrument panels flickered and died. Amid the chaos, First Lieutenant Jensen fought the controls, trying to hold the bomber steady long enough for the crew to escape. The interphone went silent dead just when they needed it most. Baggett unbuckled, pushing through smoke and heat toward the bomb bay, signaling to the crew with gestures born of urgency, not sound. One by one, the men clipped on their parachutes and moved toward the hatches. Jensen looked back only once, motioning more firmly than words could manage for Baggett to jump. Moments after the last man cleared the aircraft, the B-24 Liberator exploded in a fireball that lit the sky. For a heartbeat, the men hung suspended, drifting like white petals across the morning. Relief flickered brief, fragile. Then the Japanese fighters returned. The Ki-43 Oscars had no intention of letting the parachutes reach the ground. They dived again, guns blazing. 2 American airmen were struck mid-air, their bodies falling limp while their parachutes drifted on without them. Baggett watched the tracers cut the sky and understood with terrible clarity that his turn was coming. An Oscar peeled away from the circling fighters and lined up directly on him. He could see the pilot's head, the dark visor, the cowling painted with unit stripes. In that moment, he realized the truth in the air war over Burma. There was no Geneva Convention, no mercy, only survival. And whatever happened next would depend on what he did with the seconds left to him. The Japanese fighter came in low, its engine throttled back, almost drifting beside him. Owen Baggett let his body go slack, his head hanging forward, as though every thread of life had already slipped away. In the strange stillness of freefall, he could hear nothing but the rustle of his parachute canopy above him. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar crept closer, nose-high wings trembling at the edge of stall. The pilot wanted to be certain, wanted to look directly into the face of the man he intended to finish. The canopy of the fighter slid open. Through half-closed eyes, Baggett saw the pilot lean out. 20 feet, maybe less. A distance so small it felt unreal in the vastness of open sky. What the pilot couldn't see was the M1911 pistol pressed against Baggett's thigh, hidden until the last heartbeat. When the moment came, Owen lifted the pistol and fired 4 times, the recoil jolting through his arm as the world tipped sideways around him. 1 round struck home. The pilot's head snapped back. The Oscar dipped, shuddered, and spiraled downward in a tightening corkscrew that ended somewhere in the jungle below. Baggett didn't celebrate. He didn't even breathe. There was no triumph in the air war over Burma, only the knowledge that he was still alive for a few seconds more. But survival was never guaranteed. 3 more Ki-43 Oscars lunged at him, their gunfire ripping violently through the sky. Bullets tore holes across the parachute canopy, snapping suspension lines. The silk shuddered and fluttered, threatening to collapse entirely. Baggett braced for the moment the chute would fold and drop him like a stone. Somehow, by chance or providence, it held just enough to slow his fall. At 600 feet, the fighters broke away, unwilling to risk crashing during another dive. The jungle swallowed him whole. Branches slammed against his body as he fell, each impact sending pain across his ribs and limbs. When he finally hit the ground, the breath left his lungs in a single, violent burst. For a long moment, the world narrowed to the sound of his heartbeat. Then the pain returned, sharp but survivable. He was bleeding, bruised, shaken, but alive. Baggett called out into the green silence, and voices answered. First Lieutenant Jensen emerged from the foliage, battered but walking. Then young Samuel Crosstick burned from the fire aboard the B-24 Liberator, yet upright and determined. 3 survivors out of 9. The others were gone, some killed in the sky, others scattered across miles of unforgiving terrain. They didn't have long to search. Burmese villagers soon appeared, moving carefully through the undergrowth. In war, strangers could be salvation or doom. The 3 airmen were taken prisoner and delivered to Japanese forces, their fate sealed by the uncertainty of a land where loyalties shifted with necessity. When the soldiers heard what Baggett had done, shot down a fighter with a pistol during World War II air combat, they didn't believe it at first. But word traveled quickly, and that unbelievable act would follow him through every step of captivity, through interrogation, through transport, and eventually through the gates of a place far more deadly than the sky he had just survived. Changi prison awaited. For months, Owen Baggett's story lived only in whispered conversations behind barbed wire and in the guarded curiosity of Japanese officers. By the time he reached Changi prison, he had become a quiet legend, an American airman who had brought down a Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar with nothing but a sidearm. Yet to the outside world, the event remained invisible, swallowed by the larger storms of World War II air combat. When the war ended and Allied investigators began piecing together the fates of missing air crews, they turned to captured Japanese records. The air war over Burma had been chaotic, spread across mountains, jungles, and isolated outposts where documentation was often the only reliable witness. Among the files of the 64th Sentai analysts found a report dated March 31, 1943, an Oscar lost near Pinmana, its pilot killed the cause, listed as unknown. No American fighters were present. No bomber gunners claimed the hit. The circumstances mirrored Baggett's account almost exactly. Then came the final detail. The pilot's fatal wound was described as a penetrating head injury consistent with a bullet. For the U.S. Army Air Forces, this was enough. Owen Baggett's record was quietly updated to credit him with an aerial victory. There was no press release, no medal ceremony, no attempt to turn his survival into propaganda. In a war filled with triumphs and sorrows too vast to contain his story, remained a small private line in a service file acknowledged but never celebrated. Yet the impact spread farther than any official citation. Among Japanese fighter units, the incident became an unspoken caution. Pilots were instructed to avoid close passes on parachutists, to fire from distance, to never approach slowly enough for a desperate man to take aim. In a theater where split-second decisions meant life or death, Baggett's 4 pistol shots quietly rewrote the margins of doctrine. American crews learned from it as well. Word traveled quickly through the B-24 Liberator squadrons someone had done the impossible. It didn't make the mission safer, but it shifted something in the minds of the men who flew them. In a place where luck often mattered more than armor, the idea that one airman could fight back even against a fighter was enough to feed a stubborn spark of hope. And hope mattered, especially in the forgotten corners of the air war over Burma, where survival so often depended on the thin edge between despair and defiance. When Owen Baggett finally returned home, he did not carry himself like a man who had survived one of the most improbable moments in World War II air combat. He settled into life with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen enough of violence to understand the value of ordinary days. He served for decades after the war, rising through the ranks with steadiness, reliability, and the kind of leadership that rarely makes headlines but shapes the people who follow it. Not once did he boast about the Japanese fighter he had brought down. If pressed, he simply said he was lucky, nothing more. Yet history sees it differently. In the long narrative of the air war over Burma, a place overshadowed by larger battles and louder victories, Baggett's story glows like a small but unextinguished flame. It reminds us that courage often reveals itself when everything else has been stripped away. His B-24 Liberator had fallen. His crew was scattered or dead. A Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar was closing in for the kill. And still suspended between life and death, he found a way to fight back. That moment didn't change the course of the war. It didn't alter strategy or bend nations, but it changed the men who heard it. Among aviators, the tale became a quiet lesson: never assume the enemy is helpless. Never believe that a battle is decided until the final second has passed. And never underestimate what a human being can do when there is nothing left to lose. Owen Baggett died in 2006, buried under a simple headstone in Texas. It lists his name, his rank, and the years he walked this earth. It says nothing about Burma, nothing about Changi Prison, nothing about the 4 pistol shots that rewrote a footnote of aerial warfare. But that simplicity is fitting. His legacy was never about glory. It was about resilience. And now it belongs to all of us. So, as you reflect on this story, consider the question it leaves behind. What would any of us do in that same moment when the sky is falling, hope is thin, and survival rests on a single impossible choice? If this chapter of the air war over Burma moved you, we invite you to share your thoughts below. And if you value the lessons history leaves behind, subscribe to join us as we explore more of the forgotten stories that still echo through our world